Today, it's the Big Daddy, Lornar's Pass, one of the longest, I'll say, feeling maps in the game. As far as map completion itself is concerned, TechZoon here with the user submitted footage is actually going to beat it fairly quickly, which is really impressive. I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. One of the reasons why this map tends to feel really big is because of its association with the Guild Wars 1 region of the world. So let's just throw up the map straight away. Look at this thing. Really narrow and really long, really tall. The funny thing is, yes, it overlaps with the Guild Wars 1 Lornar's Pass, a map of the same name. The Guild Wars 2 one is actually a lot wider, a lot thicker, so I'm really impressed with ArenaNet for that. And it was only looking at the map today, in preparation for this video, that I realised some of my understanding of Guild Wars has always been a little bit amiss. I've always just thought of that long run from the northern Shiverpeaks to the southern Shiverpeaks in this game to be entirely Lornar's Pass. But that's not true. Most of it was the Snake's Dance in Guild Wars 1. The Snake's Dance is another map just like this that would exist to the south, but doesn't exist in the sequel. So, I mean, I think that's fairly interesting. Lornar's Pass is still really badass. I remember in a recent video when we were in Snowdon, I talked to you guys about how we're actually a lot further south in the Shiverpeaks than we were in the original game. And there's a particular peak here in Lornar's Pass in the very north westerly corner that I used to think for the longest time was Anvil Rock, until finally I did a proper comparison. This was before the historical guide existed. Such an amazing resource as it is. And so that had been another thing I was led astray with. It's late afternoon here since I was recording the last episode. I actually made a whole other video for you guys in the middle. But you should have seen on recent productions, I've had like a little animated potato guy appearing in the footage. Well, I had messed up the green screen on that, so I put in a lot of time rendering and uploading and publishing a video that then had this really, really ugly effect on it, and kind of I've had to redo it. So now here I am, the render's re-going, and I'm hoping that I can crank out 2 videos at once. Such a busy life at the moment. Anyway, so yeah, we're kind of very adeptly moving around. I wonder how useful Portal's going to be on this map. A lot of the vistas, a lot of the little niggling things that you've got to get out in the corners can be behind jumping puzzles on this map, because it's not just a long map, but I find the terrain is a bit rougher here. This is one of those maps where it has like those dirt roads flanked by rocks and trees and stumps and all kinds of rubble that feel really good to walk on, and I kind of want to be able to ride a roller beetle on. It'd be like a sort of mountain biking track, but the devs never implemented one here, and I guess that's because it would just be too tricky. It couldn't be a circuit. It would have to be like some kind of rally where you start high up and you move down. That's actually a nice thing about this. Even though the whole way through the map, in theory, we're staying in the mountain chain and our elevation shouldn't change, it's also true that the very northern areas of this map are high up, and the very southern areas of this map are low down. So when you ride a roller beetle or a griffin or something, you can really, really experience that, as you can end up flying from the very north to the very south without too much problem. But yeah, the southern areas are probably my favorite. We'll be a little bit of time into this video before we get there. Very ambient. They have that kind of beautiful bird song sounds going on in the background, and the sounds of trickling rivers and brooks and streams and all the green verdant areas. Mountains, but not snowy. That's kind of my jam. And it's just such an immersive location down there. Also, you get a lot of brilliant sense in this map for old Delgamore and dwarven architecture and locations, which some of the other maps have been a little bit more limited on. But there's a lot of really, really fantastic stuff for us to explore this time. Starting up here, one of the first hearts that we'll go for is dealing with the Skrit in this cave. Actually, noticing on the footage here that there are some little weeny avenues and things that you can walk through in this cave. It's a lot bigger and a lot more complex than I usually remember it being. This is quite nice. This Skrit has got an earth elemental with it called Smashy, which is kind of the perfect Skrit name. You know, it makes me think of one thing I really wanted as an Elementalist player for years was the ability to name my familiars, name my own elementals. But they're not ranger pets. They do go away. And so in Guild Wars, that tends to mean you don't get to name it. I was actually amazed when I went back to, as a bit of a sidebar here, when I went to play World of Warcraft and experience Vanilla WoW, because I'd never played that until last year. The Warlock had summons with particular names, but they were like randomized names based on what your character name was and stuff. There were all kinds of cool little immersive features like that in that game. And I kind of wish that Guild Wars 2 had that. If I was a necromancer, should I be allowed to name my minions? Certainly in a few RPGs you can. Anyway, so we're actually going in an interesting direction here. I would have anticipated us going northeast, which would take us closer to the entrance of Snowden Drifts. We actually are, I guess. We're just going to use a portal. Yeah, up to this homestead here. Very fun one. The idea being that there was a Norn party recently, and we want to wake them out. There are these passed out drunks here. The way that the two nameplates layered up there, it looked like it said passed out drunk juvenile because of the juvenile owl in the background, which the game would not be depicting. Very easy heart, fix the fences and splash water on the drunkards. I really like that as a format for a heart, but it is a bit overdone. I think most Shiverpeak maps tend to have, you know, a moot in progress or something where you're slapping water on people. I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't do this at Meetoberfest over in the Diessa Plateau. If you saw that episode, you will have seen the kind of things you can do to help that party along. Because you can come inside, and these people want food and drink just like at Meetoberfest. Some of them will get angsty and will fight you. You know, there was a really powerful thing that happened in Guild Wars 1, and I'm not sure why it felt so powerful there, but usually when you met a new Norn, you could fight them, and they wanted to do battle before, you know, they would treat you as an equal or see you as a friend or so on, and they were just as quick to be angry as they were to, you know, give you a hug. You know, that was a cool thing about the Norn, and I have a lot of really distinct memories of fighting various Norn to get access to their bounties at Resurrection Shrines and stuff. And I've always criticized Guild Wars 2 for not kind of bringing that feeling back, and yet here we are at this homestead, and you're basically doing the same thing, right? I guess it's just the way the combat balance works. You know, we're using one skill, it dies, and then we walk off. It's not quite the same experience as trying to interrupt them while they're in the middle of bear form, and then if you manage to get into bear form, it will take you a bit longer to kill them, and so on. And, you know, these big 8v1s were admittedly kind of weird in Guild Wars 1, but hey. So, Underberg, this is a brilliant place. Again, if you guys are on a relentless quest for world completion, but you want to know more about Tyria, take a break on this one. Read this. It's very, very cool. It basically gives you background to do with the Great Destroyer and the dwarves turning themselves to stone, and a lot of those big storylines from Eye of the North, which maybe you've forgotten, maybe you never played in the first place. I think all of the hero challenges in the game should have been stuff like that. Since there is no bestiary or codex in the game, you know, these other opportunities they could have had to put lore in. We really need to cling to the few places where they gave us that little bit of extra exposition and so on. I wonder if they'd prioritize a feature like that to be baked into the experience from the ground up with a kind of a Guild Wars 3. I wonder whether they would see a lot more value in it, or they would still say no, it wasn't really worth it in Guild Wars 2. It wouldn't be in the third one. I don't know why I'm talking about Guild Wars 3 so much in this series. You guys know me, I don't often really indulge in conversations about Guild Wars 3. I guess it's just because watching so much open world footage brings my mind back to a place where it's like a new beginning, it's scratching an MMO itch, it's about progression, and these are all elements of the modern Guild Wars 2 game, which is great as it is. It's not about any of that stuff anymore. Guild Wars 2 is not a game of progression at all. Not really. I mean, there's a sense of horizontal stuff. You know, a Guild Wars 3 could actually do the reverse. It could lean away from being a progression-oriented game. Guild Wars 2 always felt a little bit confused in that way to me. They always knew that at endgame, they didn't want to indulge the sense of vertical progression. They wanted to sort of taper it off and all that. And yet they still built a game with, you know, 80 levels instead of 20 and all this other stuff, only to then abandon this format, basically, in the subsequent years. So it's very wishy-washy and waffly in Guild Wars 2. So maybe they'd go more Guild Wars 1-ish with the third game, and maybe they'd return to the old, you know, level 20 thing, or no levels at all. Doesn't Elder Scrolls Online have no levels at all? That's totally a thing, right? As far as I remember. Some kind of patch that they did later. Elder Scrolls Online's got a pretty clever thing going on as well, where its version of Living World is not one really long continuous story chain, but almost like completely separate chapters, so people outside of the MMO can very easily like jump in because they don't need all the prerequisite information. That's a bit more challenging for Guild Wars 2, which really embraces the idea of one long linear story, which is amazing for us nerds in the scene, but a bit harder for people out of it. Anyway, looking back at the progression here, we're near a little dwarven dungeon. It's actually a dwarven crypt for King Ironhammer, or not necessarily King Ironhammer. It's just Ironhammer's crypt. And there were multiple Ironhammers. Breknar Ironhammer came with us, his brother, to the Fire Island chain and was destroyed there. So, is that the crypt for the king? Very unlikely. We did see again in Snowden Drifts that there was a jumping puzzle named King Jarlis's Refuge. I feel like that if that was meant to be his tomb, they would have called it King Jarlis's Tomb or something. Giannis is a weird character, really, because there's no reason he should be gone. There's no reason he should be dead. And yet, as a Revenant, you can commune with him. And the idea of a Revenant is they're communing with stuff from the mist. So that does suggest at his fate somewhere. Maybe one day we'll get a cool expansion back in the depths. I would say it would be really good with a Primordus story and maybe an Asura-centric thing. And you could get the dwarves back there and actually maybe learn a little bit more about what happened to the king. I mean, we could talk a little bit more about recent stories, but I'm trying to keep this more about just Guild Wars 2's core here and trying to avoid spoilers. I know I've been a bit wishy-washy with that as we've gone along. I'm sure there'll be more than 1 or 2 comments about it. Molin Summit here, another Dredge mine. You know, it feels like the Dredge are one of the most populous, strong races on the entire goddamn planet. Or at least the continent. Just because of how often ArenaNet use them in any kind of mountain areas. And then you compound that with the fact that in one of the dungeons, you've got like this huge army and you can see the big revolution that they're trying to form. The idea of the Dredge, if you guys don't know, is actually a really, really great story. And I think it's quite a bold and brave story for ArenaNet to do too. Which is that in Guild Wars 1, they were an oppressed underclass under the boot of the xenophobic Stone Summit dwarves. And they really didn't have their freedom and they weren't able to pursue their own agenda and their own ideas. Usually when you found a Dredge, you were fighting them because they were kind of forced into allegiance with the Stone Summit, or they were like a good guy, right? And there were a lot of great stories about the Dredge earning their freedom and their revolution and so on. There was even Dredge stuff, by the way, down in Cantha, so you might see Dredge coming up in the next End of Dragons expansion. That would be very exciting to talk about, really. But when it came to Guild Wars 2, 250 years later, the Stone Summit are gone, so it's like, how did the Dredge handle themselves? And you see, it's not all rosy. You see that building a society, finding your place as a people in the world can be a challenge, and many of them are actually antagonistic to us now. Which, again, I think is a cool little twist, and because it would be very easy for them to say, and then the Dredge lived happily ever after, but that's certainly not true at all. We still kind of see them on the fringes of society here rather than fully ingrained, you know. We're not playing as Dredge. It's not the 6 playable races and the Dredge were one of them. The devs, it's weird to think that the devs could have easily made that choice. They could have gone with all kinds of weird races as the mainstays for this this product. You got to remember, and I'm quite cynical about this, but you got to remember that the 5 playable races being what they are in Guild Wars 2 is all very specifically engineered and designed to pander to as many consumers as possible. They had to have the cutesy, like, diminutive race, right? And their original take on the Asura from Guild Wars 1, they even softened up like mad to get that bar. They had to have that because people like playing gnomes in MMOs and people, you know, expect that. If you're going to be the best MMO ever, you need it. So they conform in that way. And they introduced the Norn. Many of the things that happened in Eye of the North were specifically looking ahead, knowing that they wanted these specific like archetypes to be filled in. You know, it's not a coincidence that the Sylvari feel, at least in terms of like from a purely shallow cosmetic perspective, the Sylvari feel kind of like elves because they're trying to hook in instantly. They're trying to do that, and they're doing that all over the place in the game. And you know, you can be cynical about it, but I also do applaud it. I think it's quite clever. If they were doing a purely lore-oriented expansion, if they were completely insular and they only cared about their own subject material and their own characters and all that stuff, they didn't look external. And I think there can be value in that sometimes. You might have had a Guild Wars 2 where, yeah, the Dredge were playable. It's weird because that you might also think the dwarves could have been playable. They might have never written the dwarves out, but the dwarves are also kind of, you know, probably only exist in Guild Wars 1 because they were a nice tropey fantasy thing to implement in the first place. And I actually find the removal of the dwarves from the story quite bold and a cool move for this franchise. So, by the way, we find ourselves on one of these walkways. I love this. It's actually a very, very cool route up to the Dermot Priory itself. You can see the bridge to the Priory way off in the distance over there. I've always loved this area. It's been a really fun heart to do as well, destroying all the paintings and the rubble and the gruel that are swarming you. Nowadays, with gliding and later mounts, the full damage side of it doesn't really get your heart going. It doesn't really make you jump anymore, or for me anyway, it doesn't. Because you can always just, you know, quickly pull a glider out or something. But for totally new accounts, I'm sure you don't have those masteries. You can actually have a bit of fun there. You also saw for a second we dipped into a mini jumping puzzle area, which doubles up for one of the personal story quests, where there's a really fun wind mechanic that I feel like the devs could have done more with, but a smattering of the original jumping puzzles had. But basically, there's a pit of death. If you fall into the pit of death, it's an instant kill zone. And it's very rare for Guild Wars 2 to do that. But this was it. Oh, it's not an instant kill zone. I think it's an instant teleport zone. It teleports you back out if you fall down this hole. And your job is to navigate a thin stone bridge with these big holes on it that you've got to jump, while this wind is billowing through this cavern. And your only telegraph for where the wind is, or when the wind's coming, is how it blows on some flags in the environment. So you've got to watch the environment, watch how the flags move, try and get a sense of the pattern by looking at them. Really cool. Here we're getting much closer to the Dermot Priory. We might even be just about in range for the Dermot Priory music. So if you guys don't know, there is unique music that plays here 100% of the time, always when you're around the Priory. It's funny, because I don't think the Vigil Keep has an equivalent. I'm sure there is on the soundtrack a song called like the Vigil or the Vigil Keep or something, but I think that was handled as more of a generic track for maybe combat sequences and just general exploration throughout the game. Here, this Dermot Priory track is really localized to this area. It's gorgeous. And I kind of wish that even maybe the Order of Whispers had a similar thing, but they don't sort of have an overworld presence, so maybe that doesn't work. But if you're playing along, you know, mute this dumb video. Don't worry about it. Actually listen in-game. Turn the music back up. I know a lot of people have it off because, you know, they want to listen to whatever music appeals to them at the time, or they're watching TV, or they're listening to my videos or whatever. But really, really enjoy it. I think the advantage here as well is because this is such a multi-layered area of the map. You know, you've got the upper area here, Bouldermouth Vale and the Dermot Priory itself, with the trading posts and the repairs and the Asura Gate and so on. And underneath you have like a whole cave system down there with actual worthwhile gameplay. And even inside the building here, I mean, look at how beautiful this is. You've got like actually got like 3 levels in here. You've got this level, you've got underneath, if you choose to go down the stairs here. Then underneath that, you've got the secret archives, where I think different music actually plays in there. And then there's the rock caves underneath, and there's actually a secret lair to Scarlet from Season 1 underneath. There's so much. It's crazy. Beautiful area. If you guys have learnt New Crichton, I'm sure many of you haven't, but if you've learned the actual, you know, new written language associated with this game, all those tablets floating around the central pillar of light, you can actually translate. You can actually read them. They talk about the movement of the world and the Elder Dragons and all kinds of big current events. I'm sure there are translations in the wiki. There is a fantastic POI, Odens Quarters. Let's talk about that for a second. Ogden appears in the personal story, and if you've seen my series on this, you'll know this, but Ogden appears if you're a Norn, and Ogden appears basically right at the end. There's not much other influence for Ogden, but he is a dwarf, the only dwarf at launch for us to be able to interact with that's stuck around. Oh, sorry, also, he does appear in one of the cutscenes, the Dermot Priory cutscene. He doesn't really say anything, he's just sort of standing there in a montage of all of their characters, I believe. But here's what I'm trying to say. If you play like an Asura or a human, if you join the Order of Whispers, if you join the Vigil, any of these things, you will not interact with Ogden until like basically the final dungeon when you're in explorable mode. So you might not know he's there. Now that was my experience, and I think the experience for the majority of players. But when you're map completing Lornar's Pass, you find that tent. You walk up to the tent and it says Odens Quarters. They like hint that he's there. I remember being so fascinated, thrilled that Ogden was still around, and just wanting to know what the game was going to do with him. Only to play pretty much the whole campaign, and they didn't do much at all. But yeah, he's a brilliant character. I still want to see more of him even in recent stories, to be honest. They could use him more. You could use him more, ArenaNet. We saw him get used a good amount during Season 2, but then he's sort of weaned off a bit. Just a bit. There are a few opportunities to visit him within the Priory itself now. Some of the legendary collections ask you to do that, but man, the mystery behind that little tent will always stand out to me. Nice little place here. Help herder Lyot maintain her Doliac ranch. This always feels really cozy as a heart. I don't know why. Feels kind of just like neatly nestled into one of the corners. Makes me feel warm going there. There is some big dangerous worms nearby as well. In fact, I think one of the dynamic events that spawn... Yeah, this here. Frostmoor. This is really wild. This event spawns a worm called Frostmoor, who is a champion, would be very tricky to solo. We're obviously just going to be running past. Now, what's really bizarre about that is Frostmoor existed in Guild Wars 1 also. But in Guild Wars 1, he was not in this area of the world whatsoever. He was way up to the north, the far Shiverpeaks. And he was at the bottom of one of the most difficult dungeons in the game. A dungeon called Frostmoor's Burrows that was swarmed with worms. And when you finally fought him, he was gargantuan, epic. So he was a really prominent, really specific story boss. The story basically being a bunch of brash Norn want to hunt him down. And so you go into this absolutely insane place to try and kill him. An incredible experience for Eye of the North. And so, yes, I like that in Guild Wars 2 they kind of brought him back. But they just dumped a random, almost regular-sized ice worm here, nowhere near that place on the map. Like, what was going on there? I just don't understand. My theory is, because they didn't do it justice, really, and now it's like they can't go back and do it justice because Frostmoor's just sitting there. And also, we killed Frostmoor in Guild Wars 1, so what, is Frostmoor actually more of like a title for just big ice worm? Is it supposed to be an entirely different creature, and the suggestion is just the guys in the area of the world have now called it Frostmoor, and that's just a coincidence or something? I don't know, but it's an obvious homage back to that place in Guild Wars 1, and I don't think they did it well. I'm wondering, here's my headcanon, I think maybe, you know how many maps have 2 meta events? Well, on this map, you've got a cool meta event down to the south that doesn't culminate in a world boss, well, anything marked properly as a world boss, but has all these cool branches, really fantastic, we'll talk about it in a second. But I wonder if maybe they wanted to have a cool meta event around that region that would eventually spawn Frostmoor as a full world boss. It never got fully implemented in the end or something. And so here we are. Maybe? I don't know. I wonder what the inspiration was there. Maybe they were just being blasé, and maybe it's okay for a developer to be blasé sometimes and just dump something in. So this heart I tend to get pretty annoyed by. You have to collect the right equipment and use the right skill to really be able to DPS through these things. You can't just attack them. You've got to use his device. There are some fun interactions where there's a little pen, an electrical pen down near where the Asura is doing research, and you can spawn different things in there and transform them. It's fun to fiddle with, but I always forget the rules of the game, so to speak. And when you're in the middle of Lornar's Pass, this is such a big, long, grueling map that you kind of don't want, it's that thing where you don't want to engage your brain for a second or something, you know, at least on repeat world exploration playthroughs. So yeah, this one I always remember in a bit of a weird way. But yeah, it looks like we've actually managed to do this quite well. I think by holding the rifle you can interact with like electrical discharges on the ground or in the area. We're really just aiming for the elementals too, by the way, not necessarily the Jotan that are running around in this section of the map. They are not of as much consequence. So the Falls River Valley, this place actually had some good changes around Living World Season 1. The geography here is really interesting. There's a bunch of trenches that all move to the same centralized location. That is where the marionette once upon a time spawned. And you can actually go there and find the marionette's body now. There's a full vista on it, and they turned its body into a jumping puzzle. So they really, really did some very cool stuff. It's a bit like how Keswick's Hills, they integrated the stuff with the Nightmare Tower into the map completion. And I really like that. I admire that about this. It's a weird fight, the marionette, because my memory of that patch is they added 2 big bosses at once. They added the marionette, which was really easy and kind of boring, and kind of on rails and automatic. And they also added an elite world boss, the Triple Trouble Worm encounter, which is what really captivated me and was, you know, one of the highlights of my time playing Guild Wars 2. So I've never really cared that much about the marionette because it was so definitively overshone by this other experience that was added at the same time. And yet, nowadays, you know, so much old content is coming back and they're trying to, you know, get full value out of everything. A lot of people talk about the marionette and they want to see it return. I wonder how much TLC the devs would have to give it to make it a really, really popular encounter. And I don't think they owe it to us, by the way. Like, the nature of Season 1 was that things came in and they left, and maybe the fact we can never play the marionette again is sort of a celebration and a testament to that original idea, you know, maybe? This area is really amazing. So this is the other meta event here, Steam Insurgent. The steam creatures are contained on the frozen lake. Yes, one of the more enigmatic and mysterious elements of Open World Tyrian 2012 was the introduction of this new faction of mechanical steam-powered creatures that were arriving through portals. Various personal story steps have hinted at and expanded on it over the years, particularly Season 1 did as well. I've always thought that the Lornar's one, these ones here, are the best. There's really good enemy variety. They're really well made. It's a shame they kind of weren't used a little bit more, you know. I feel like if just one of every 3 centaur camps was replaced with a steam creature experience, or just one of every 3 dredge things was replaced with the Steam creature experience, the game would probably feel a lot more varied and rich for it, because there's a lot of different enemy varieties there. Here in Lornar's especially too, there's some great dynamic events with massive buildings that you can full-on destroy. It's really cool. And you only really get to experience them here as a part of that meta, which doesn't kind of have a big pointed conclusion, so I think a lot of people forget about it. This place is amazing too. Grenth's Door, so much trivia about this. In Guild Wars 1, a lot of the endgame was accessed by communing with the gods, by bowing at their statues. Most people did that at the Temple of the Ages. You can go back to the My Queensdale episode if you want to learn more about that. But really weirdly in Guild Wars 1, out here, and this is a super remote place, okay? As far as the first game's concerned, there's no outposts nearby, no easy waypoints, right? So you really have to travel a lot to get here. That exact statue, that exact place of the world was there in the original game. And as a weird, like, little Easter egg, if you nailed it, that was an alternate entrance into the underworld, one of the end game locations. I mean, no one would really use it for that because you would just use the Temple of the Ages or the Chantry of Secrets in Lornar or the temple down in Cantha, but it was like an added thing. It was really weird. And in Guild Wars 2, they re-implemented it as a hero challenge, as a nod back, and then many years later, you can now go back to the underworld in Guild Wars 2. It's a raid in Guild Wars 2, and guess where they put the raid entrance? Right there, which is fantastic. Just like with Guild Wars 1, there's an alternate entrance, this time being the aerodrome, so people don't really use it too much. But it is there, and they did, you know, little living worldy things, and there was a cool little patch that hinted at it before it came out. Overall, just really, really nice, and it's cool to be able to sit here and do a video and tell you guys that eventually you can now actually travel into the underworld. That's what that big portal was, that green-looking swirly mist portal. I think for any original player just running through who's around level 30, 40 at this point, probably wants to steer clear of it. I think they'll probably give you a level 80 warning or something, but it's something to remember for later. So anyway, yeah, here we're at the Marionette. I was probably a little bit premature with all that commentary a second ago, but it's fine. This is where we fought it. It was a very cool fight. In terms of being a cinematic fight, you know, I've already talked a lot about the gameplay, but as a cinematic fight, it was good. Really happy to see TechZoon struggling here. To actually climb up this and get this Vista is surprisingly fiddly. I'm actually amazed they did this. Actually, I'm not amazed. They're doing very well with all of this, to be honest. But, so it's my expectation they'll do well now. But I always really struggle climbing on that Vista. I know that some of you guys watching this will have had the same experience. Don't worry, me too. I always, I just slip off. I don't know exactly where it is they want me to stand. It's just, tricky and fiddly and annoying. So, we are very close now to the southernmost reaches. This heart here is actually situated in a place where you can complete the heart by killing all these random dredge outside at these camps. Or there is a cave you can go in. I think we'll end up in there anyway because there's a point of interest. But I nearly always go into the cave to deal with things. It looks like they really filtered a lot of stuff around. Air vents that you can block up. Wait, is the idea there that we're blocking the air vents so that the people underneath suffocate? That's pretty grim, honestly. Collecting relics, which I think is the Priory. Here, yeah, Explorer Leandra is probably a member of the Diamond Priory. If someone's title is Explorer, tends to be that. And yeah, you can come on, just basically kill things. Easy heart to do for what is actually quite a large area. This happens sometimes with Guild Wars. They dedicate a large area of the map to one heart, and the heart is balanced such that you do it really fast. There you go, the Multage Digs, which might be a reference to a Guild Wars 1 thing, maybe. And, you know, no one would ever complain about that because people just want to get the hearts done quick. But when I watch it, I kind of think, this sucks. You know, that should have been a long one. That should have been a little bit more like the God's Lost Swamp so that people get more value out of the environment there. But hey. So, we're finally getting to some of the southern areas. We will be seeing more and more grass as we go forwards. This general area of the world hosts a very rare event to do with a band of adventuring members of the 5 races, basically, called the Modus Sleris. They're very, very rare, but one of the best, easiest places to find them is in this general area of the map, so be aware of that, guys. Also, we're in range of a heart here to deal with the Destroyers. So the Destroyers are kind of more associated with, I'm going to say the Asura, obviously, but also the Tengu. You find a lot of Destroyer stuff happening around the Dominion of Winds. And then finally, you find good amount of Destroyer stuff where there is naturally occurring lava, or i.e. a volcano, a place called Mount Maelstrom we'll get to later. So the decision to include some destroyer activity here I've always found quite interesting. But it kind of, it builds into the main idea of Primordus. Like, To me, there are like 2 Elder Dragons that are kind of like horror Elder Dragons, in as much as you could be vulnerable at any time. One of them is the Deep Sea Dragon, you know, who is shrouded in mystery and darkness and in the depths and so on. But Primordus is just underground, not underwater, underground. Primordus can come up anywhere. Primordus can create earthquakes anywhere. And, you know, that's truly terrifying. You should always be scared of Primordus. At least Zaitan is far away in Ore, and at least Kralkatorrik is far away at the Crystal Desert or wherever the, you know, the Brandstorm takes you. But this guy can be anywhere, anytime, whether there's any rhyme or reason to it. And so throwing some destroyers in this largely snowy section, I think makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty fun. So whenever they pop up a bit, again, it's a bit like what I just said with the steam creatures. Maybe they should have done it more. Maybe, you know, he was the first to wake up. He should be strong anyway, so maybe it's okay if he's a persistent threat. Maybe replace some of those Centaur ones with Destroyer ones as well, and it starts... Maybe everything gets a bit homogenized then. Maybe there's too much mixing going on, but you never know. Continuing to move along the easterly wall of the map, we're in what is honestly one of the more forgettable parts for me. This is a Jotan Heart. And I think if you look on the top right of the UI where it's got the Renown Heart text, it pretty much says it all. Battle Jotan and hunt ice worms. Yeah, real profound, real exciting. Just kill some things, impress F on some worm mounds. There's not a great idea for this, and there's not great dialogue supporting it. It just fills in this little part of the map, which otherwise wouldn't have had too much content. It's funny because in some of the later maps, like particularly the later Char maps, I feel like there would be areas just like this, but they wouldn't bother putting a heart anymore. Maybe they would just have like a very vague bit of platforming and then, you know, call it an explorer achievement or something. And that kind of gets the job done too. But here they're still kind of playing with things. I feel sort of bad here as well. I mean, these Jotan are on their own, chilling out in their own huts. They're not being aggressive to anyone. Is there an event where they come down and they're aggressive? I don't think so. So that cave as well in there, there's something special in that cave, isn't there? Is it just a gather? I just saw the nameplate for a second. Maybe you guys can go back and pause for a second. Maybe there's an event you can trigger in that cave. It might have been that. So here's very important. Make sure you come up here near this fence. If you don't recognize this route up onto this high elevated area on the very east side flank of the map, you can miss out on getting this Vista that we're wandering all the way over for here. Champion Etten nearby is up, and a player is fighting it. That is a really long event, and I have spent many hours, well, not hours, minutes, struggling alone there, and it's in such a remote place that you can never expect to get any help. If this was me playing this, I would 100% help that other player over there. The Etten's health isn't even going down very fast, so they're probably struggling a bit. I would 100% kill that, because you really deserve that kill if you go for that Etten. But anyway, yes, that's all to get that one Vista. If you just waypoint here and you want to get the Vista, your instinct is going to be to go south. And try as you might, you won't be able to platform your way up there. It's going to be really annoying. The actual route is to go north up by that fence. So make sure you bear that in mind. Where we're standing right now, this is where the Modus Solaris can spawn sometimes. I'm pretty sure. And yeah, we get to all the lush green grassy areas. I'm actually going to shut up for a second. Listen to the birdsong here. Listen to the game here.
A new place.
Man, it's beautiful, isn't it? Well, the Mesmer sound effects aren't beautiful. And the little ding of the Renown Heart, enough to make anyone nostalgic, surely, at this point. I always love this area, and I like fighting Ettins. There's something visual about them, but Ettins, to me, I really like their design. It's not that I'm particularly enthused by their lore. It's not that I find their derpiness charming or whatever, and, you know, the kind of things they say. Just visually, the way that they walk, their size, their general shape, the color of them, I think they feel really cool, very entertaining somehow. So I just like dealing with Etten events. It's probably not a coincidence that in my Kessex Hills video, I talked about where I used to go to do all the dynamic events for the daily, and a lot of it involved Ettins. I just like these guys. They're fairly fun to fight as well. They actually do damage, but they're very slow and telegraphed. They're actually tanky enough to survive a few hits. They've held up better than most creatures for the modern power creep, let's say that. So anyway, the heart itself, you can do this ring, essentially. in a big circuit around near where he is, just killing air tins and pressing F on these trackers, and you'll get everything. There is a dynamic event that can trigger down here as well, which, if it's up, I think you can get even more progress real quickly. There's some pretty funny dialogue around here as well, if I remember rightly. I like quiet, cozy, distant little locations like this. This is not particularly close to any large settlement in the game. It's not even particularly close to any waypoints, and it's a pretty sweet area. Those are, I mean, that is two different words. It's a pretty and comma sweet area. In case you've been wondering, as soon as we move a little bit more west now, most of this video we have been overlapped with Guild Wars 1, but now that we move west and we go to the other wall of the map, we're not going to be overlapped with Guild Wars 1 at all, and ArenaNet had a lot more freedom to kind of do whatever they want. In particular, they introduced this idea of these big lakes, these big melted down locations, and there were a ton of flooded Delgamore settlements in the basin. In fact, this whole area that we're standing at right now is very, very closely connected to a sweeping meta event that starts with collecting a bunch of artifacts in the lake, and then once you do that, you bring them up here to this house. This place called Guntra's Secret, by the way. If you're a member of the Order of Whispers, you can go into that building, and it's really huge. You go into the building, you see this huge mountain on our right? That's a hollow mountain with all these rooms and stuff. There's several places where there's actually more exploration for you to do as a member of the Order of Whispers. No one else gets. There's never any map completion in said locations. I talked about one in Snowden Drift as well, because, you know, they don't want to screw you out of 100% map completion because you picked the wrong order. That would be ridiculous. But yeah, there's a meta event that takes you next to that house, and then based on whether you win or fail, it can branch in two different directions. There's a giant fire imp boss, basically, fire demon that you're fighting, and a long escort that eventually takes you far away into more green areas. It's a fantastic dynamic event chain, and the main thing it always makes me think of, again, is in the early days, a very popular YouTube video that somebody made that... They're not someone that was ever really, like, super active in the Guild Wars 2 scene. They're certainly not around now. This was like a one-off thing that they did in, like, 2012. But they were complementing the idea of dynamic events. They released their video maybe a few months after launch, where criticism had started coming in to Guild Wars 2 about the game being kind of shallow. And I think that criticism was always warranted, because... people get conditioned to do what you're watching on this series. They get conditioned to just spam around getting map completion objectives, and they don't talk to the NPCs, and they don't listen to the in-game dialogue, and they don't look at how events chain together. In fact, if they found an event, they'd probably just beat it and then run off, because there's more map completion to be done, not realizing that if they stood about for another 15 to 20 seconds, the NPCs would start talking, and then, you know, the fallout of the event would begin, and it would chain into something else. There's a real problem with Guild Wars 2 where people are conditioned to consume it in a shallow way, and thus they miss out on most of the beauty of how dynamic events chain together and how they work. And there was a guy who did a YouTube video defending this product against these criticisms of its shallowness, saying that it's only shallow because of the way you're consuming it. And he looked at this well, not this meta event, we're now at the pirate meta event, but the meta event I've been talking so much about, he talked about that, and how there's so many events there, and that they can branch left or right. And I remember watching that video and really enjoying it. I think I enjoyed it back then because I was still a very big geek about Guild Wars 2, and just any kind of defense of it I was really enjoying. I think nowadays, I think it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B. It's Guild Wars 2's own fault that people consume it in a shallow way. It's its own fault, you know, so in a way it's not excusable. To a certain degree, I have a very low opinion of people, and I think if people are being asked to take their entertainment into their own hands and have their own initiative and consume things in a slightly inoptimal way, if it meant that they had more fun, most people can't be trusted to do that. Most people aren't actively thinking about their own consumption of a product and trying to improve it. They're just on rails. They're just doing what the product teaches them to do. So I don't think you can blame the community. I don't think that a video scolding them necessarily was ever needed. You know, it's just something for ArenaNet to think about, how they're incentivizing people to consume what they've built, and how much what they build can be missed because of that, you know. It's a problem with all kinds of games, I think, but MMOs obviously especially so, because they're so big and it's so easy for value to be lost through the cracks as some systems undermine other ones. Anyway, so this is the lake itself. The pirate event up there really is very centralized, very local to only that little area. And you can see all the pirates around and kind of push them out. And isn't there a friendly quaggan there or something? There's a lot of legendary collection stuff to do in that area too. You notice we're not actually under the effects of a meta event. This is probably what I'm getting confused with. All those events I'm talking about aren't a meta. They're just a big, long event chain that was worthwhile being a meta. But back in 2012, I guess the devs were a little bit more inconsistent about what became a meta event and what didn't. So, yeah, very, very easy to miss, because how are you supposed to know that an event chain is there if it's not under the umbrella of the full-on meta? So I never really do this. I never pick up the pirate rum for this heart. I never do this. I just kill things. And in particular, there's a bridge just down to the south. First of all, there's a region that you unlock slightly down to the south with a really crazy name. It's called like the Demon's Moor or something. And I have no idea why it's called the Demon's Moor. There's no like extra background information about it. And as I said, it doesn't really overlap with Guild Wars 1 there. So I don't know what was really going on. But the pirates here are really dangerous because they actually use player skills, and a warrior update that occurred for Sword Offhand meant that Sword Offhand now applies Torment, which means that these pirates now apply Torment, and they're really dangerous, so be careful there. That was a problem they were trying to avoid with the development of Guild Wars 2. It was a big thing in Guild Wars 1, but it persists even here. I think that's really kind of funny. So, yeah, that's pretty much Lornar's done. All we needed to do was eat the thing for the hero challenge, which is pretty funny. So good job there. Really efficient. I love this. I nearly always miss something. You know, I'll get to the very bottom of the map and realize up at the top there was something that I hadn't quite nabbed. But there you have it, ending here at the Demon's Moor. Really efficient run. Hope you guys enjoyed this coverage. Please remember that we do have a community Discord. If you want to chat more about this, if you want to join the community, I'm trying to kind of push people in there at the moment. Even if you're getting to this video years later, the Discord will be around, and we'd love to have you. There's a link in the description for that. And until next time, guys, take it easy. I'll see you for another episode of the map completion very soon.